Behind the quiet beauty of Colorado's mountain town, where the Morphew family appeared to live a picture-perfect life, a far darker story was unfolding behind closed doors. Suzanne Morphew was a devoted mother, a cancer survivor, and a woman who had finally decided to walk away from a marriage shadowed by control, secrecy, and fear. But on Mother's Day, 2020, she vanished without a trace. What first looked like a simple bike ride gone wrong soon spiraled into a chilling mystery filled with conflicting alibis. But the most terrifying question remained. What really happened to Suzanne in those final hours before she disappeared forever? People often say the darkest stories don't begin in the shadowy corners of big cities. They start within homes that appear flawless, full of smiles and framed family portraits. A neatly kept lawn, a father standing confidently for the camera. But what truly exists behind that image? Barry Morphew liked having control over his business, his finances, and especially those closest to him. His strength came from maintaining strict control over everything. His weakness was the fear of losing that control to someone else. He was seen as a devoted husband and a self-made man. To others, however, he seemed like someone leading a double life, capable of hiding his true feelings behind a refined exterior. This story is not just about a crime. It explores how fragile the boundary can be between outward harmony and the silent, suffocating strain within a family. Suzanne Morphew was raised in a traditional American home, where faith, family, and community values were strongly ingrained in her upbringing. From a young age, she was recognized for her kindness and compassion, with a natural ability to connect with others. Her family described her as gentle yet strong, qualities that helped her endure several challenges in life. When she began her own family, Suzanne fully dedicated herself to being a mother. Her career goals became secondary, as raising her daughters and maintaining a stable home became her main focus. In Salida, the small town in Colorado where they lived, Suzanne was respected as someone who always put her family above everything else. Life challenged her resilience more than once. She was diagnosed with cancer twice, and the treatments were long and exhausting, yet she survived both times. Those experiences changed her outlook on life, making her value each day as something precious not to be wasted. Afterward, she carried a quiet resolve and began finding happiness in life's simplest pleasures. Her recovery also sparked a new love for mountain biking. For Suzanne, it was more than just a hobby. It became a source of healing, a way to regain her strength and sense of independence. Those rides along Colorado's rugged trails weren't merely exercise. They were a reflection of her resilience and renewed strength to the outside world. Suzanne appeared almost perfect, healthy, vibrant, and deeply committed to her daughters and her home. She reflected the ideal image of a small-town American mother. Neighbors viewed her as someone who had built her life the right way. But beneath that image lay a much more complicated reality. Barry Morphew had established a strong reputation in Salida as a self-made man. His landscaping business provided a steady income, allowing for a large home and a comfortable lifestyle for his family. To the community, the Morphews seemed genuine: a strong marriage, devoted daughters, financial security, and active participation in local events. But behind that picture-perfect image lay a different truth. Barry maintained full control over the family's finances. Suzanne had no access to their accounts and relied entirely on him. Even minor purchases were overseen by him, effectively taking away her independence in decision-making. That control went far beyond finances. Barry aimed to influence every part of family life, from daily routines at home to his wife's plans and public interactions. On the surface, he appeared calm and caring. But behind closed doors, everything centered around his authority. The reality within their home was very different from what their neighbors believed. What others viewed as dependability was, in reality, pressure and control. Suzanne felt less like an equal partner and more like someone stripped of her freedom. Private messages between Suzanne and her close friend Sheila exposed the cracks beneath the image of a perfect marriage. In those messages, Suzanne explained how Barry's behavior shifted with the setting, charming in public, yet tense and unpredictable at home. She likened him to Jekyll and Hyde, emphasizing his unstable mood swings. She confided that despite his expressions of love, Barry didn't recognize the emotional harm his actions caused. In conversations with her sister, Suzanne revealed even more. Not long before her disappearance, she admitted she no longer saw a future in the marriage and expressed fear of Barry's temper and controlling nature. It was evident she'd made her decision. She was ready to leave. Another set of messages revealed a different side of Suzanne's emotional life. In 2018, she reconnected with a former high school classmate. What began as casual conversation gradually developed into a romantic relationship. They communicated daily, made plans, and even discussed traveling together and possibly building a future side by side. That relationship became a source of comfort for her, something that gave her hope and reminded her of what happiness felt like. By the spring of 2020, Suzanne had reached her decision. In a message to Barry, she clearly stated, "It's over." It wasn't written in anger, but as a firm declaration. To her, the marriage had ended, and she was ready to move forward. Sunday, May 10th, 2020. Mother's Day began like any other. Suzanne's daughters, Macy and Mallory, were away on a trip. Barry, even though it was the weekend, left for work early that morning. He later stated that the last time he saw Suzanne was around 5 a.m., while she was still asleep. He also mentioned that she usually went for a mountain bike ride between 8 and 9 a.m. after he had already left for the day. Sometime after 7 a.m., Suzanne went out for her usual ride. It was part of her regular routine during the warmer months, a short trip before noon along familiar trails, always with her phone. These details would later play an important role in building the timeline of her disappearance. By midday, her daughters were unable to reach her despite multiple attempts. The lack of response, especially on Mother's Day, felt deeply alarming. One of the daughters contacted a neighbor and asked them to check on the house. The neighbor found the doors locked with no sign of anyone inside. Alarmed, they called the police. Notably, it wasn't Barry who contacted emergency services. It was the neighbor. When law enforcement reached Barry, he said he had left for work early that morning and didn't know Suzanne's whereabouts. His later claim that he'd suggested the neighbor call emergency services drew attention, as in most missing person cases, especially involving a spouse. That step is usually taken directly by the partner. Barry consistently maintained that Suzanne had gone out for her usual morning bike ride. Search efforts began right away. Initially, authorities considered the possibility of an accident, a fall, a wrong turn, or an incident on the trail. Search teams concentrated on the routes she commonly used. Soon, her bike was discovered abandoned in the brush along the roadside. Its position was concerning. There were no signs of a crash, no skid marks, no sharp turns, and no indication she had struggled to stay upright. It was simply a bike, oddly left behind. Even more unusual, her helmet was found in a separate location, in the opposite direction from where she was believed to have traveled. This detail was especially troubling, as in most cycling accidents, a helmet remains near the scene. Equipment scattered across different locations is highly unusual and requires an explanation. These discoveries quickly shifted the direction of the investigation. Detectives narrowed the timeline to the early morning when Suzanne was last seen at home, and the afternoon when her daughters were unable to reach her. By the end of the day, police were treating the case as a disappearance under suspicious circumstances. At this point, the first doubts began to emerge about Barry's account of events. Investigators needed to confirm his schedule and whereabouts, while also reconstructing Suzanne's last known actions using available evidence. From the beginning, Barry Morphew was the primary source of information regarding Suzanne's final hours. He maintained that nothing seemed unusual in her behavior the day before, and that Mother's Day was meant to be a quiet, ordinary day, supporting his alibi. Barry stated that he had driven to a construction site in Broomfield, roughly 150 miles from their home. He claimed he was scheduled to work on a retaining wall project, which he said explained why he wasn't present when Suzanne disappeared and why he spent most of the day out of town. But that story didn't hold up under scrutiny. Data from his phone and truck showed he was at the Broomfield site for only about 29 minutes, hardly enough time for the large-scale job he claimed to be doing. Additionally, the tools he brought were just basic hand tools. They're far from what would be needed for a major construction project. These discrepancies raised serious questions about whether Barry's trip to Broomfield was legitimate at all. Analysis of his cell phone data revealed troubling patterns during a critical period. His phone recorded unusual movements within the house, which investigators later described as erratic and inconsistent with normal behavior. Then, around the same time Suzanne's trail went cold, the device either lost signal or was switched to airplane mode. When questioned, Barry gave a strange explanation. He said he'd been running around the house and yard trying to chase off squirrels that he claimed were damaging his property. Investigators found this hard to believe, and noting that the phone's activity appeared more like an attempt to conceal his actual movements inside and around the home. His handling of trash that day also raised concerns. Surveillance footage showed him making deliberate stops at multiple dumpsters on the way to Broomfield, tossing bags along the route. When asked, he claimed he was simply disposing of wrappers and vehicle trash. Detectives, however, suspected a more deliberate effort to destroy potential evidence by scattering it across different locations to make it harder to trace. Even early in the investigation, these inconsistencies began to form a troubling picture, shifting Barry from grieving husband to a possible person of interest. A preliminary search of the Morphew home revealed several troubling discoveries, none consistent with a simple biking accident. Investigators noted Barry's physical condition, observing fresh scratches on his body. The location and nature of the marks suggested possible contact with another person, and his claim that they came from routine activities was unconvincing. The injuries appeared more like evidence of a brief, intense struggle than ordinary scrapes or work-related wounds. Investigators then focused on the master bedroom, where a crack was found in the door frame, deep and clearly caused by a strong force. Experts confirmed the damage wasn't present when the couple first moved in and suggested it could have been caused either by someone trying to force the door closed from the inside or by a powerful strike against a shut door. In any case, it suggested a forceful interaction, not something expected in a peaceful household. Another clue emerged in the laundry area, inside the dryer drum. Investigators discovered a plastic cap typically used to cover needles in dart tranquilizer systems. Its placement was significant. It had gone through a full drying cycle, indicating it had likely been in someone's pocket or loose in the laundry. Items like this are unusual in a domestic setting. Its presence raised serious questions and required further investigation. Individually, each detail might be dismissed as accidental or coincidental, but together they suggested something far more concerning: a possible confrontation inside the home shortly before Suzanne stopped responding to calls and messages. At this stage, authorities began developing a working theory that some form of struggle had occurred inside the house. From there, investigators turned to reconstructing a precise timeline of what occurred inside the home before Suzanne went silent, cross-referencing every detail with phone records, movements, and other time-stamped evidence. Barry's alibi which relied on a supposed work trip to Broomfield, began to fall apart under scrutiny. A particularly troubling detail emerged from his stay at a Holiday Inn. Staff reported a strong smell of chlorine in his room and towels soaked with the substance. Barry had sent two of his employees, Morgan and Jeff, to the construction site, instructing them to continue work on a retaining wall. But when they arrived, there were no materials or equipment present. Investigators reviewing the timeline concluded that the trip appeared more performative than practical. Barry made only a brief stop at the job site, spending most of his time at the hotel, where something unusual appeared to have occurred. When asked about the damp, chlorine-soaked towels and the strong chemical odor, Barry claimed he had used the pool. That explanation was quickly rejected. The pool area was closed at the time, with access restricted. Hotel staff confirmed it hadn't been opened or maintained for guest use. Furthermore, the towels showed no signs of recreational use. They were scattered across the room floor, and the intensity of the chemical smell indicated exposure to a concentrated cleaning agent rather than pool water. This hotel incident became a key moment that intensified suspicion around Barry's account of events. Later, a search of the Morphew home uncovered a locked safe containing items highly unusual for ordinary hunting. Inside were a dart gun, a tranquilizer rifle, and a collection of related equipment, syringes, plastic caps, dart tips, and ammunition. This was not standard hunting gear. It appeared designed for the remote delivery of substances typically used with tranquilizer systems. The presence of two separate dart firearms suggested both experience and routine use. Barry did not deny his familiarity with the equipment. In interviews, he told investigators that he used tranquilizer darts and sedatives to calm deer so he could remove their antlers for sale. While this practice isn't widely known, it exists in a legal gray area and requires precise knowledge of dosages and handling. Sedatives used in this manner are extremely potent, requiring careful control, especially when administered from a distance. Barry's statements indicated he had a strong working knowledge of dart systems and the effects of these drugs. Investigators focused on one particular substance, BAM, a powerful veterinary tranquilizer made of 3 active agents known for quickly immobilizing large wildlife. BAM is typically reserved for use by professional wildlife agencies and zoological staff. It acts rapidly even in small doses and demands strict tracking for every application. It isn't available in ordinary pharmacies and is tightly regulated under federal and state law. Investigators reviewed official records of controlled substances across neighboring counties from 2017 to 2020 and found that Barry Morphew was the only private individual with registered access to BAM. In contrast, public agencies like Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the National Park Service maintained strict inventory controls, with no reports of missing doses. At the time of Suzanne's disappearance, Barry was the only civilian legally in possession of that specific sedative, designed for long-distance delivery via DART. This combination of registered equipment and exclusive access to a controlled substance shifted the investigation toward a scenario involving deliberate immobilization, rather than any theory excluding sedatives. While such a setup might seem excessive or accidental in another context, here it was significant on its own. It demonstrated intent, technical skill, and exclusive access to a critical chemical. 1 year after Suzanne Morphew's disappearance, investigators took a major step. In May 2021, Barry Morphew was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, tampering with physical evidence, and attempting to influence a public official. At a press conference announcing the arrest, officials stressed that even without a body, the sheer amount of evidence pointed directly to Barry, according to the prosecution's theory. The alleged motive was Suzanne's decision to end the marriage. Prosecutors claimed that when she finalized her decision to leave, Barry used the tranquilizer, legally obtained in his name, to incapacitate her. From there, prosecutors contended that he relied on his knowledge of the terrain and technical expertise to hide her remains. However, as the case moved forward, systemic issues began to emerge. The most significant challenge was the absence of Suzanne's body. Without it, investigators could not confirm a cause of death, leaving a major gap in the prosecution's case. Additional problems arose around evidence handling, with some samples mishandled and others compromised. Issues with the chain of custody weakened the forensic trail, giving Barry's legal team strong leverage for his defense. His attorneys argued that the case relied almost entirely on circumstantial evidence, highlighting the absence of a body, no direct proof of sedative use, and gaps in the forensic timeline. Their stance was clear. The prosecution had constructed a narrative based on assumptions and investigative missteps. In 2022, just days before the trial was set to start, the case fell apart. Prosecutors dropped the charges, citing the need to strengthen the evidence. The dismissal was without prejudice, meaning charges could be refiled if new evidence emerged. Nevertheless, the move was widely seen as a defeat. After a year of buildup, the trial never took place, and Barry left the courthouse a free man, hand in hand with his daughters. After the dismissal, Barry Morphew launched an extensive media campaign. His legal team pursued a two-pronged strategy, seeking legal remedies while also influencing public perception. They portrayed Barry as the victim of law enforcement overreach, framing the investigation as biased and dismissive of other possible explanations for Suzanne's disappearance. A key element of their public messaging was the support of Barry's daughters, Macy and Mallory, who had consistently expressed their belief in their father's innocence since his arrest. Following Barry's release, the daughters continued to publicly stand by him, asserting that they did not believe he had any role in their mother's fate. To many observers, their steadfast support sent a strong emotional signal. Grieving daughters defending someone they believed responsible for their mother's disappearance would seem unlikely. Barry and his daughters began appearing on television programs and giving interviews to major news outlets. He spoke candidly about how the accusations had affected his life and fractured his family. Media coverage often featured photos of Barry with Macy and Mallory, emphasizing their closeness and unity, a strong emotional argument in his favor, implying that if he were guilty, his daughters would not stand by him. Barry worked to portray himself as a man wrongfully accused, with his daughters serving as a central emotional anchor for that narrative. Their unwavering support made his position more convincing to the public. While criticism of the investigation cast doubt on the original charges, this chapter of the case became a clear example of how high-profile criminal proceedings can transform into media battles, where shaping public perception becomes as influential as courtroom strategy. In May 2023, a new case drew public attention. A 55-year-old woman named Edna vanished in a remote mountain area of Colorado. She had gone on a hike along popular trails but never returned home. Her phone went unanswered, and her car remained at the trailhead in Chaffee County. The case was a chilling echo, another woman disappearing without a trace in the same region where Suzanne Morphew had gone missing just a few years earlier. Search teams, including volunteers, K-9 units, and sheriff's deputies, combed the trails and ravines. Drones and off-road vehicles were also deployed, but the first several days brought no results. The area's rugged terrain made the operation challenging, with thick forests, winding streams, and deep gullies complicating every step. Edna's disappearance immediately drew comparisons to the Morphew case, fueling speculation across news outlets and social media. Could there be an unidentified predator in the mountains targeting middle-aged women? The theory of a third party quickly gained traction, even though law enforcement did not publicly endorse it. And Barry Morphew's legal team saw an opportunity and seized it, claiming that the new disappearance suggested the original theory of domestic conflict had been flawed from the start. Publicly, the defense argued that if two women vanished under similar circumstances in the same area, authorities needed to reconsider the possibility of an external threat. Then, in September 2023, investigators made a breakthrough. Human remains were discovered in the Colorado wilderness, buried in a shallow grave in a remote, off-the-beaten-path location. The remains were confirmed to be Suzanne Morphew through two forms of identification: dental records and a medical device implanted during her cancer treatment. Both identifications were conclusive, prompting a series of forensic analyses. The most crucial finding came from the toxicology report. Traces of BAM, a powerful veterinary tranquilizer, were detected in Suzanne's bones. The concentration indicated it had been administered while she was still alive, at a lethal dosage. It was clear her death had not been accidental. Experts also noted that her body had not decomposed in the location where it was ultimately found. The state of her clothing, absence of animal activity, and soil composition suggested a different scenario. Suzanne's remains had likely been moved, having been buried elsewhere for an extended period before being relocated to the mountain site. Specialists from multiple fields were brought in, including an entomologist who studied insect activity and determined that the bugs present did not match what would be expected if a body had been left long-term in the open wilderness. A botanist discovered microscopic plant particles on her clothing, species not native to the area where her body was ultimately found. An anthropologist confirmed there were no injuries indicating physical trauma as the cause of death, supporting the theory that a sedative had been used. Together, these findings led to a chilling conclusion. Suzanne had been killed with a chemical agent, her body hidden elsewhere for a period, and only later reburied in the mountains in what appeared to be a deliberate effort to conceal evidence. From that point, the investigation entered a new phase. Law enforcement finally had what they had lacked from the start: Suzanne's remains and a confirmed cause of death. In August 2024, the district attorney's office officially classified Suzanne Morphew's death as a homicide. The toxicology report became the centerpiece of the case, with prosecutors describing the breakthrough as a spotlight cutting through darkness. BAM, the powerful tranquilizer found in Suzanne's remains, became that spotlight, and it pointed to only one person: Barry. The defense's theory of an unknown assailant began to crumble. No one else had access to the substance, and prosecutors repeatedly emphasized that fact. BAM was not a random contaminant. Its presence in Suzanne's system served as the forensic link connecting her death to someone with motive, knowledge, and access to a restricted sedative. Confronted with this, Barry Morphew's defense team shifted tactics. They focused on DNA evidence recovered from Suzanne's vehicle. Forensic experts had found a partial male DNA profile in the glove compartment which, when checked against national databases, yielded a shocking result. It matched genetic profiles linked to 3 separate unsolved cases of intentional assaults in other states. Barry's attorneys seized on this evidence as a central point in their defense. Their new theory suggested that Suzanne might have fallen victim to a random attacker, and the DNA evidence indicated that a dangerous individual linked to other violent cases had been near her. To support this, the defense pushed for what they called a third-party investigation, arguing that law enforcement had unfairly focused on Barry while overlooking evidence pointing to someone else. The defense's strategy aimed to create enough reasonable doubt to make a conviction difficult for any jury without direct proof. However, for the prosecution, the DNA evidence was not decisive. Forensic experts explained that the genetic material found in Suzanne's vehicle did not directly connect any individual to her disappearance or death. The traces could have ended up there coincidentally, possibly long before the events in question. More importantly, there was no evidence linking the unknown DNA profile to the burial site or to the use of BAM at any point in the investigation. Barry Morphew exhibited behaviors often seen in suspects facing serious charges: selective admissions, shifting timelines, and altering details. As facts began to contradict his account, investigators repeatedly noted his evasive responses. He avoided providing precise timelines and frequently changed the subject. Midway through the narrative, for example, when asked about the night before Suzanne disappeared, his recollections were inconsistent. At one moment, he couldn't remember what he had cooked for dinner. The next, he struggled to describe simple household routines. This did not appear to be ordinary forgetfulness. It suggested a deliberate effort to blur the facts and avoid committing to any single version of events. During court appearances, Barry projected confidence, sometimes excessively. His calm tone, forced smiles, and deliberate composure made a strong impression on observers. Psychologists, however, noted that this behavior was likely a control tactic, an effort to maintain the image of an innocent man rather than a reflection of true emotional steadiness. One behavioral pattern was particularly notable. Barry frequently blended truth with fabrication. He would acknowledge minor, inconsequential facts, while denying critical ones, creating an illusion of credibility. This made listeners more likely to accept his version of events without realizing that essential pieces were being distorted or omitted entirely. The strategy allowed him to appear consistent, even as major elements remained unaddressed. Altogether, these patterns painted Barry as someone skilled in manipulation, using selective honesty to shape the narrative. Prosecutors argued that Barry's behavior was not due to flawed memory, but a deliberate effort to confuse the investigation and conceal the truth. On June 20th, 2025, Barry Morphew was arrested again, this time in Arizona, where he had been living with his daughters. The warrant was issued by the state of Colorado and accompanied by a public statement. The 5-year-old case was once again moving toward trial. Barry did not resist arrest and quickly waived his right to contest extradition. Within days, he was returned to Colorado, where a new legal process began. The court released a 7-page indictment detailing the circumstances of Suzanne's disappearance and death. It included allegations of sedative use, attempts to fabricate an alibi, concealment of the body, and manipulation of key evidence. Barry's bond was set at $3 million, effectively ensuring he would remain in custody until trial. This new arrest marked a crucial turning point. The prosecution now had not only circumstantial evidence, but also Suzanne's body and a confirmed cause of death. Compared to the failed 2022 indictment, the second case was significantly stronger as of September 2025. The outcome remains unresolved. The court must now evaluate the evidence presented by expert witnesses and deliver a verdict that could close a 5-year chapter of uncertainty. Ahead lie long, challenging proceedings that will determine whether Suzanne receives justice and whether her husband faces a sentence that could forever change the course of the Morphew family's future. In my personal opinion, this case is one of the most disturbing examples of how a carefully maintained image of the perfect family can conceal years of control, fear, and emotional isolation. What stands out most is how the evidence seems to build not around one dramatic moment, but through a pattern of behavior: financial control, Suzanne's messages expressing fear, Barry's shifting timeline, the suspicious disposal stops, and most importantly, the later forensic discovery of the tranquilizer in Suzanne's remains. Taken together, it paints a deeply chilling picture of premeditation rather than panic. At the same time, What makes this case especially tragic is the long road to justice. The initial collapse of the charges, the years of uncertainty, and the emotional divide created within the family. To me, this is not just a murder case, but a heartbreaking story about power, image, and what can happen when someone refuses to lose control.